Hello, how is everybody doing? Today is Monday. It's the start of a new week. And so let me just, I can check the voice. I can hear that. Great. Okay. I will keep an eye on the audio settings just because last week there was a little bit of a problem with the audio. So hello, Sarah. How are you doing? How's your week going with your preparations before your trip? So thank you for your questions. We're going to take a look at a few of those details. So let me just go over here. Just checking here. Yeah. Let me get over to Facebook. So two of the things that you had asked about, Sarah, were, let me read this. Okay, so, okay, yeah, already taking Italki lessons for Dutch. That's great. Okay, let me read your message here. So I have been dabbling in Dutch since the beginning of this year, and I originally wanted to start learning it next year. But now I'm going to Amsterdam in July, so I want to focus on Dutch for the next 3 weeks to be able to at least have a very simple conversation. I want to concentrate on the basics, pronunciation, basic phrases, think about the situations I could use the language in and which vocabulary I would need, and take 1 or 2 Italki lessons. And so any further tips for preparing? And another question here about language exchanges. What are good ways to keep them fun? What approaches do you have to language exchanges? Mostly talking on Skype or another chat program. And how do you come up with things to talk about? How do you prepare? And any games that you like to play? And there were several responses here with some links from, we can see if I can find these. Here they are, yeah. And Irena had several links and suggestions for meetup.com. So Meetup is a website where people can organize an event and sign up to say that they will attend, or based on maybe some interest or activity, and another one here. So that there's a calendar on the meetup.com website for the city of Amsterdam. There's a website here called Speak in Levels. I'm not familiar with that one. There's Hey Langu, HEYLANGU.com. This apparently looks like it's a website for finding teachers. Speaky.com, I've used that one before. That's a language kind of a chat website to connect with people from around the world. And then a website here, invadingholland.com. This looks like it might be a blog, and they're discussing some cultural habits or customs in the city. Okay, great. And hello, Emanuela, as well. How are you doing? Great. And okay, so what you're mentioning here about learning Dutch in just a few weeks, this reminds me a little bit of the experience I had when I was trying to learn Hungarian, Czech, and Polish for about 6 months before making a trip to Central Europe. The trip itself was just for like about 2 to 3 weeks, but I decided to spend about 6 months kind of for those 3 languages. And my approach for that was, since here you're mentioning like the basics, the pronunciation, basic phrases. So I got a small travel phrase booklet. The website Lonely Planet has a pretty good one. I'm not sure if I find it within 2-3 seconds. Now, I'll have to provide a link to this, but where can I share my screen here? And hello, Maria. And no, I don't see this booklet all for a second. So, what would I say here? Lonely Planet and Dutch phrase book and dictionary. So there's also from, Lonely Planet was a good one that I had. It's just, it lists here, at least on my set of Amazon, for like about $9. It's not that, not going to set you back a lot. And depending on the bookstores where you live, this would probably be a good one to use. I became very dependent on my phrase book for the Central Europe one because I was able to buy train tickets, bus tickets, by using some phrases and seeing if there was something like a student discount. And it did have, include the pronunciation guide for each one of those languages. It included the basic words that I would probably need. Now, I mean, but this was about 11 years ago when I was using this, and I didn't have cell phone access. So I would probably recommend now, if you have your cell phone and if there is maybe some access to a public Wi-Fi in an emergency, you would still be able to look up a few words or things. So having a phrase book, that's one of my first suggestions. With this particular language, and knowing that you have a background with speaking German, I would look up some of the key differences in pronunciation between Dutch and German. There might be some false cognates. There might be some things that might be familiar, but they might be pronounced in a different way. I've had some frustrating experiences with that between Spanish and Portuguese, because I can read it, I can understand it when reading the text, but when it comes time to pronouncing it, I feel a bit foolish because I get tongue-tied, because there are certain letters that are pronounced in a different way, and then that just kind of erodes the confidence, and then you start feeling a bit self-conscious, and then you don't want to practice or say anything. So if you have a little bit of a phrase book, and I would make sure to get used to the phonetics, get used to the phonology. There's usually some good information from Wikipedia about phonology. It's usually very technical. That's usually where I would go myself, because I'm kind of familiar with the phonetics and some of those things, so I could find some commonly mispronounced words or things to be careful with. But there are, like, if you look up, I think the 101 podcast, let me see if I can get this on the screen. So, so let's get this one here. Okay. So, okay. So this is a little bit of a an Amazon shout out, I guess, but this Lonely Planet Dutch book, I would probably recommend something like this. You could, if you open this, you can have the look inside part, and they would give you an idea of what you're looking for. So these things, the pronunciation, what kinds of words you would need to be working on at the beginning here, some of the language difficulties, working on numbers, times and dates, then working on things related to transportation, accommodation, the hotels, renting, shopping, making purchases, and socializing. These are some phrases as well, which could be of interest or help. And where else? Things on, restaurants, eating out, even things related to special meals. So they've been updating these kinds of phrase books based on what people might need, or I don't know, things on travel, things for women, or for if you had to go to a pharmacy. So they have been updating these kinds of dictionary guides and phrases. Here's also the dictionary at the end there. So it looks like they have been updating based on kind of user feedback to see. And this is also a good way, if you take a look at this table of contents right now, you can start to anticipate, do you know this? Do you not know this? What are some of the basics there? So it's meant to be a phrase guide, but it could be a way for you to prioritize what do you need to focus on first. And then you could supplement this with some other information the next week or two before you travel. I was going to recommend the podcast, like the 101 series. So it's like Dutch Pod 101. They usually have some interesting deals with this where, like, if you sign up in the next minute, you can get access to all of their content for like $5 or $10. There's usually some pop-up on here, but I've used this for a couple languages, and they seem to have a good set of dialogues that include a native speaker and somebody learning the language. And then there are questions about, so what's the difference between this word and that word? So they do include some cultural information. You can kind of binge listen to this material to get you started, and mostly for the pronunciation. So it's the investment on this. It's not very expensive, but they do give you a lot of audio content. You could upload this. They're usually MP3 files, so you can include them on a cell phone or some kind of a music device that you use. So you could have that in when you're traveling to Amsterdam. So you like listen to this on the train or on the bus. So I would consider this as well. This is a good one to get familiar with for these lesson plans and the audio. And what else? Sometimes there are other podcasts that are out there you can find on like iTunes. So if I look on the iTunes store for the looking for the podcast, but this for the iTunes store, I think you need to have the software for it. Not actually use this for looking at it, but let's say podcast iTunes Dutch. Learn Dutch. Well, that's the Dutch Pod 101. That's the first things. But there are a few other Pure Dutch, to speak Dutch. Even this one, Dutch News. This could be something for native speakers to listen to. So these ones, if you're listening to them as a learner from scratch, it might be a bit slow. But if you do also look for things that could be related to Dutch being used by native speakers, that would be another way for you to get used to how people will speak at a natural speed and amongst themselves. Because usually when people are learning from scratch, there's usually a rude awakening when they finally get to that local city or country and realize like, whoa, okay, I did not really prepare my ears completely for natural conversational spoken speech. So kind of as a self-defense, get used to the natural speed. So that would be another way to look at this. Also with the phrase book idea, you could see if there were a Dutch-German phrase book. I'm not quite sure how to look that up here, but I guess I would go to Google Translate and look up the word for like phrase book in Dutch. So they call this a taalgids, and maybe for German. So, okay, or Zinnenbook, or what was the other one that he had? Taalgids. Okay, so taalgids. And what was the other one that they had put here? Dweets Zinnenbook. I'm not quite sure what that Zinnenbook might be, but I'll put these all in here and I'll see what comes up. And yeah, there is a Dweets Tauget. So the reason why I would look this up as well is that, yeah, Netherlands, Dweets, so that would be Dutch and German. This would be interesting because the phrases that they would be proposing you, like the original in Dutch, they would probably be a little bit more authentic than what might be translated from English to Dutch from from Lonely Planet, where these would probably be the way that people actually speak and maybe phrase things in a certain way. So this might get you closer to authentic sounding phrases. Whereas in another phrase book where it's maybe from like English to Dutch, it might be simplified in a way. So this is a way of like reverse translate what you want. So this is taking the original Dutch, looking at it for translation to German, and you would recognize the German. So if I look, you can't look inside here. But if you could find something like this, that would be another thing to find. So you might want to, you might find this when you first get to Amsterdam and look for a bookstore locally. And so you could have maybe both if you were into phrase books. Let me go back to the screen here and see some of your comments. Okay. Where is the screen here? Okay, yeah, let me see some new phrases here. Okay, yeah, so hello also Sharif and Gosha. So yeah, I like the phrase book idea, yeah, and the phrases aren't exactly what natives use exactly. So that's if you could use another version of it, that might help you a little bit. Yeah, if that's only about €6 or so, and that would be another way to get you something that native speakers might be using. What else on here? Yeah, in Duolingo forums, I know there's a Facebook group for Duolingo. I know there's a lot of people who have joined the speaking challenge who have come from that group. I think one of our participants had mentioned let's see if you can find this here. Yeah, Duolingo Dutch learners. Yeah. So it says group Duo Dutch here. Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, that's another way you can connect with people learning the same language, see what recommendations they have, especially if they have already traveled to Amsterdam, see what recommendations they might make. And also comment here from Sharif. I guess that Facebook is one of the fastest ways to acquire language without getting bothered by grammar stuff. I think with the phrase book, it is a way for you to kind of focus on the essentials, because sometimes it's the kind of you bombard yourself with kind of overload with too much information at the beginning. So I think, and the biggest sense of overwhelm is what's the next step? And when you're presented with like lots of books and websites and resources, knowing what the next step is kind of, it's up to you. And if you're just getting familiar and you don't necessarily have a plan, that can kind of stop you in your tracks. Like if you could have maybe, unlimited direction where you could head next, but if you have a plan or you prioritize because you have limited time, then this forces you to just stick to what are the essentials? What do I need to know now to survive? So I kind of realized that when I got to Bratislava during that trip that I had made, because I prioritized Hungarian, Czech, and Polish, and I completely neglected the Slovakian language when I got to Bratislava, even though I was only staying for less than 12 hours in the city just to get from maybe the bus station to downtown, see the river, walk around a little bit, and then get back to maybe the train station. But because I had my phrase book, I was able to survive. But otherwise, I completely neglected everything, and there weren't any maps in the bus station, so I couldn't even just really improvise. I started to kind of feel like I was in some kind of a spy game where I had to figure out words, or in one of those escape rooms. I felt like I was in an escape room where I had to find clues. And so I was looking, okay, what's the word for money? So I can exchange my Hungarian forints to the local currency. And then from there, what's the word for map? Because I wanted to buy a map because I couldn't find one in the bus station. And then looking up from map, where am I? And then finding where is the town center and where is the train station. And so it really felt like some kind of an escape room experience, but it was kind of fun because I like that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it was it was just a bit kind of like, uh-oh, I skipped. I skipped that language, and now I have to figure out it from scratch so I can get out of the bus station, get some food, get on a and luckily I did find one local person who could speak English and explain, okay, to get on the bus, you have to pay for a ticket on this machine, and then the train station's over there. So they were able to point us in the right direction, but it was a bit of a stressful kind of a choose your adventure or escape room, but it was, we survived. We managed to get from Bratislava to Poland, and then I had about 6 months of Polish that I could survive with. But yeah, question here. Yeah, what's my normal speaking speed? Yeah, right now this is probably my normal speaking speed when I'm explaining things or talking to friends and family. And yes, like the maze running. And I think a problem with a country like Netherlands is that they probably will switch to English before I get the chance to get a sentence out. Yeah, you could try to pretend not to speak English to force them to, like, pretend to be a Russian tourist who doesn't know English well enough. So you could force them into speaking Dutch with you. Just like give them a blank stare when they speak to you in English. So like if English is not a solution, that for some reason you nod your head and kind of look like you understand a little bit more when they speak Dutch, they might be inclined to speak that a little bit more. But yes, I think English with foreigners might be a reaction in these languages, like the Netherlands or Sweden, Norway, Denmark. I think realizing that more people speak English internationally than those who make the effort to study the local language, but just try to act like a foreigner whose English is not good. That might encourage them to find a solution. Okay, let's get over to this other comment you had about language exchanges, since there's also several of us here who may not necessarily be studying Dutch, but I mean, the approach might be, you can apply that to different languages and different travel experiences. But let's go back to this question you had of language exchanges as well. And if any of you have other comments here, questions, feel free to leave those here. I'm taking a look at those as well. So this other question that you had was about what are good ways to make them fun, and what approaches do you have? Is it mainly talking? And how do you decide what to talk about? And how do you prepare? And what kinds of games can you play? Okay, so in the speaking challenge, at one point we had mentioned a few things where there are games, I think, like on Facebook, or there are games, well, there used to be games on Facebook, but there are a couple websites where you can log in to play a game. I was trying to find ones that did not necessarily require creating an account. That would be a little bit easier to just start a game. But there are platforms where you could challenge somebody to a game. So I think on Facebook there are things like Words with Friends. I've used also like a trivia app, I think called like Trivia Crack. That's an app that's on the phone, and I think you can log in through. You can create an account there, or you can log in through Facebook, and then I think you can add your friends, so you could challenge them to a trivia game. I think there are some other platforms where you could like do a game of poker or chess, checkers. Those wouldn't really have much talking. If you're, I mean, there might be the side talk. So you could be you could be on Skype and having a window open for a game, and then it could be like if you were in person. I think chess is probably not one where you want to talk so much. It's usually the concentration, but I don't know, poker game, something like that, an online virtual a game like that. That's usually where people talking and have some other activity to do besides the talking. Trivia could be a little tricky if it's in a foreign language, or depending on which language you're practicing in this, it might have too many local cultural questions at first. And do you still use the old-fashioned tools and methods when you start learning a new language? I guess what do you consider old-fashioned? I guess that's books, audio cassettes, or I mean now they're MP3 files, but yeah, whatever is available out there to get you started. I mean, I might go really old school and use some of the Foreign Service Institute guides from the U.S. State Department. Those things were written in like the 1950s or so, and they're very thorough. They really approach that learning process, and some of the programs are called like FAST, where it's what is the FAST program? Like, what's that? I think it's familiarization and short term. So their FAST language program for the languages, it's meant to be, yeah, if I can write this, these FSI. So they're meant for these diplomats of the U.S. diplomats, these foreign service institute, and you can find these. These are now in the public domain. There are the PDFs for those courses and the MP3s. People have recorded the audio cassette tapes, converted them to MP3s, and so you can follow along. But it is a very systematic, kind of just drilling it into your brain kind of approach for that. I've liked that. I kind of like that approach for just drill it until I learn it. I think some people, they want something a little bit more hands-on, a little intuitive, a little bit more kind of interacting with people. But I do like that kind of drill it. It's an old school approach. I think a lot of people don't necessarily advise that approach anymore because it's rote memory. Like this rote memory, it's just drill it again and again. I like to combine that with other stuff, just kind of supplement. I think my mindset is a lot of supplement. This program might not go into all of this much detail, so maybe supplement that with something from over here. I also like to see things from 2 or 3 perspectives so that I can see it from a couple different angles, and then that just kind of layers the information and creates a sense of frequency. So I realized like, okay, I've seen that, it's familiar. I'm a little bit more, I understand that concept a little bit better when I see it 2 or 3 times or 4 times, and maybe from a different perspective. So maybe one set of information or website or method book might show me in this context, in this phrase, then I might need to test it in another one. So I get to see it from a couple different perspectives. Let's see a couple other comments here from Sarah. So yeah, Sarah says, last week I posted in a local language exchange group and got a lot of replies. I said in my post that I wanted an active exchange. Oh, okay. Interesting. Going to museums, going hiking, making music. Oh, that's cool. Okay. So yeah, that's another option where, yeah, if you get a chance to visit and meet somebody locally, that's an interesting way to increase the amount of time that you're spending with somebody. And then it's not so just like, okay, you meet for 20 minutes online and then exchange the hello, how are you, where are you from? And then kind of where does this conversation go from there? But yeah, if you had something in common of an interest of like, hey, let's visit this museum or hiking. Personally, I'd probably be a little kind of cautious about the hiking and meeting somebody for the first time. I mean, like being in the middle of nowhere in the woods with a complete stranger, that's a lot of trust. But maybe going to a public place like a museum, and if it doesn't work out, then you each kind of walk off. That's kind of like, hey, well, thank you, but yeah. But in the middle of nowhere, the woods, and you're the only person there, I'd be a little kind of just cautious on that one. But yeah, that's easier to find something to talk about in general, more active. Yeah. Okay. Yes, hiking on the first meeting. Yeah. And Skype exchange. So I'm excited to actually meet people. Yeah, I think that'd be cool. And when he came visiting from America. Yeah. So I think probably in a European context, it'd probably be, yeah, public places, meetups. Those are a few interesting things. If you haven't heard of it, there's a thing called if you've already made your accommodation reservations, but there's also this thing called couch surfing. I'm not sure if that's the actual website name, but yeah, couchsurfing.com. So sometimes with this, you can stay at someone's apartment for free, but I guess it's kind of, sorry, it's not coach surfing, couch. Sorry, I wrote that. Yes, it is couch surfing, not coach surfing, couch surfing. Have to be careful with the spelling there. Yeah, so it's you stay at somebody's place. Maybe there's some kind of exchange of let's say, hey, you can stay at my apartment if you teach me how to play the guitar. That could be something like, okay, I'm looking for people who know how to play the guitar, stay at my apartment for free and just teach me. Or there could be a language exchange one where I live in Amsterdam and I want to learn German. You're a German speaker, and so you could find possibly that could exist. I'm not sure if that is there. Yeah, I guess you have to register first before you can do all the searches there. But that's another thing to find. I think on the Airbnb website, somebody was recommending to me, at least for the service side of the Airbnb, they were telling me if I wanted to get new headshots or photos for my website and for social media, they were saying Airbnb had these services in addition to lodging. So it's a way that like somebody might be a tour guide. That's one of the services that might be on there. So you have to pay for that service for like a tour guide, but it might be a little less formal than going through some kind of a travel agency to book some kind of a tour. So that might be somebody who's local. It might also be somebody like an international student who might be making some extra money by also being a tour guide. So that could be another person you could, you pay for their service of giving you a tour, but they might be another source of like, hey, could you give me a recommendation on this or that, or where's a good place to eat? So having access to a local, somebody who knows the culture, that's a useful, beyond the service of just hiring a tour of walking around the center of the city and some of the historical places, but knowing what information they have, that got to be some extra, a bonus on there. Or you could hire, if something is cheaper than going for a tour, like, okay, get some pictures done for social media. I know that's usually a bit more expensive, but the point I'm trying to make is maybe there is a service that might be a little bit cheaper, and then you also ask them some tourist questions, or you practice the language with them or something. So, for example, like you could get your hair cut and practice speaking with a hairdresser who might be a little chatty. That could be kind of a free lesson, not free, but working with, okay, you're there to get your hair cut, but realize like, okay, you could practice talking. I'm usually not very chatty with the barbers, but find some kind of a service, or I don't know, talk to a taxi driver or something like that. But I think everybody in Amsterdam rides bicycles, but yeah, just find some creative combination there for which kind of services might be more inclined to talk with their customers or their clients. And one of my lunch told me about international greeter. Oh, okay. Let me check that one out. I know Irina had mentioned something about Meetup. See if there's things like that. I've joined a website called, oh, interesting, free walks in more than 140. Okay, you don't even have to pay. Okay, okay, that's a cool one. Okay. Grab your greet, enjoy a free walk. Cool. Okay. Interesting. And just, yeah, finding people who would have a kind of a shared cultural, kind of wanting to help other people. So, okay. So yeah, I'll have to look into that one. That's a cool one. Thank you for that recommendation. And other things here. Yeah, so we mentioned a little bit like games. So yeah, there are these digital games that could make it interesting, make it fun. What else? I think in terms of preparing what you would like to talk about, it depends on what kind of person you end up like that they're looking for. Are they serious about the language, or are they kind of using language learning as an excuse to meet people? So that's a little tricky sometimes to find, is serious language learners, or are they using language exchange programs as a way to find kind of like a virtual dating service? So I've seen that on services, I don't know, like HelloTalk, Speaky, a few times where, I don't know, people want to, I don't know, they ask a few personal questions and then it just gets a little uncomfortable. So it's important to kind of weed out people to talk to. I think in general, I usually tell women learners, seek out other women there's usually a little less of those inappropriate comments or inappropriate exchanges in general. That's what I've seen. And I have to think about some topics before a session and look up a few words to find a way. Yeah, depending on the language itself. I've also noticed that the level that you have, usually the person whose level is a little bit higher usually ends up dictating like the dynamic of that exchange. So what I mean by that is, like, if I wanted to do an exchange with you between German and English, and I'd say, okay, well, right now my German, it's a little weaker, it's a little rusty, and your English is a lot better than my German. So probably you're going to be determining the dynamic of that exchange, because you could switch to English, you could practice more. I probably would be thinking and trying to like, oh, I can't express that idea in German. So I probably wouldn't be able to move the conversation so much. But if you can get yourself into a situation where your Dutch is higher than somebody's German or somebody's English, you might actually be able to kind of direct that conversation a little bit. Like if I wanted to work on Russian, I think my Russian is a bit better right now. So if I found somebody who's English, a Russian speaker whose English is kind of weak, I can translate, I can explain a few things in Russian, and I don't think they might be able to do that so comfortably in English. So I can move things a little bit more than necessarily waiting for them to kind of just, who's going to get more speaking practice in that. Like if I had to explain something, I would probably get a little bit more of a chance to speak. It's not necessarily something to be an unfair advantage, but I mean, knowing this little thing about whose target language is a little bit stronger than the other one, usually ends up kind of directing that exchange. If you kind of use that to your unfair advantage, well, kind of just don't abuse that, but be aware that that's usually some kind of dynamic. Usually there's somebody who's a stronger level than the other person. So like on italki, you can see some of these language bars of like, are they beginner? Are they advanced? So if you can kind of understand how their level in your native language, you could kind of try to figure out. Some other language exchange apps also have that as well. Are they beginner, pre-intermediate, intermediate, advanced, almost native-like, and give you an idea. So the more native that person is, or the more advanced that they are in your native language, there's a chance that they will be very comfortable speaking that with you, and probably that's going to be the default. Okay. Planning in advance, I think that does help planning a little bit, maybe some topics. Sometimes like the speaking topics that we use in the speaking challenge, maybe modifying them, maybe taking some of them, putting them into a list on a Google document, just like, oh, here, almost like a menu that you could choose from, pick from, like at a restaurant. Like, hey, I'll take a side of movies and TV shows, and I'll take an order of what did you do last weekend, or museums and cultural history. So just see if you can find some kind of a language topic menu, create that for yourself. Or actually, we could probably turn that into a topic, some kind of creating a language exchange list of topics. I know the website ITESL.org. These have conversational questions. Sometimes a couple of them, I mean, they're based on a ton of topics, but this is a good place to look for. I actually don't use them I actually don't use them when I'm trying to come up with ideas for the language for the speaking challenge. I just try to use other sources of inspiration for questions, but this website has a ton of topics to choose from, and then each one of them, if you click on them, there's probably at least 30 to 50 questions that could be related to that. But there's a lot. There's a lot of topics that are on here. Yeah, most people prefer to talk in a random way. Yeah, but you could kind of slightly analyze what did you do in your last conversation with somebody and realize like, okay, what kind of questions did you ask them at the beginning, and maybe anticipate, could you ask those questions to yourself, and would you be able to answer them? So when we do some of those icebreaker questions at the beginning of each month, like after about week or after the first week, and we ask about like day 8, day 9, and say, hey, here are like 5 questions you could ask people. Try to think of some of the questions you would ask, and can you go through them rather quickly, almost like the like those YouTube videos with Vogue. It's like 73 questions. Yeah. Here's a whole set of on the Vogue, the magazine. I didn't quite realize this thing existed when going through all these speaking questions, but somebody recently had mentioned this to me of like, oh, I love that interview style, like somebody off camera asking all these questions and somebody walking around their apartment or their office and kind of just answering them. That's really what this Vogue style is. And I see if you can go through a couple of those questions, listen to it, hit pause, answer it yourself. See if you like, is that an interesting question? Could you come up with a few words for that, kind of similar to what what Benny Lewis is doing with Fluent in 3 months, where he is having a script. So if you're not familiar with Benny, and is like speak in a week. Yeah, I don't know why I said that, but yeah, speak in a week. This one of the things that he does in here. This kind of short email course for 1 week. This is one of the ideas he has there is a script to kind of introduce yourself. So yeah, and some of those videos are celebrities doing that kind of a thing. But it's just a way to get some ideas, like what could I talk about? What is something interesting I could say about myself? I think some other ideas that I would like to pursue with language exchanges is kind of the proactive part of like offering to help somebody. So that could be something I could record something for them. So I could record, let's say, the alphabet. I could record the numbers from like 1 to 10 or 1 to 100. I could take something that they had written. So if they wrote their script, and I could correct that and maybe pronounce that. So they could listen to that and work on their pronunciation. Some of this could be things you find on the website, like Rhino Spike. So the idea with Rhino Spike is kind of language on demand, like the audio. So there could be translating, transcription, pronunciation. But if you can find a language exchange partner and realize like, okay, what are some things that people want to help them with the learning? Maybe you could, there was one person I'd spoken to a while ago, Liliana. She was working on a project of a audiobook, kind of a on-demand cross oh, what did she call it? Cross language. It was so something like cross reverse reading. So if the one person I was working with on there, we were looking at, let's say, Crime and Punishment in Russian. He had the English version, I had the Russian version, and I was trying to read this in Russian to practice my Russian. He was trying to read it and practice it in English, and then I would give him some feedback on pronunciation. He might also make the recording for me in Russian so I could listen to how it should sound. I could make the recording as well in English so he could hear how it should sound. So we started making kind of an audiobook for each other, based on a short text. I think for me, Crime and Punishment was probably way too difficult, and also the vocabulary of the language was probably a bit older. But if you could take something like news articles, that could be of something of interest, that could be something that could become something you could also talk about afterwards. So if you, I don't know, you find something of interest in the news, you find it maybe in Dutch, you read it out loud in Dutch, you try to practice your pronunciation, send that to the Dutch speaker. Maybe they have something in English that they want to practice. They read it out loud, or in German, you correct their pronunciation. And then maybe you talk about those two topics the next time you meet. That's something you could do as well. I think another idea with that kind of cross reverse, and I think in the speaking challenge, we're mostly kind of correcting a few basic mistakes here, but we don't necessarily get this big picture approach where like a teacher could go in and like I probably should be doing this on the English document, but going like, okay, these are about 5 to 10 common mistakes that people are making. Let's turn that into a lesson and then kind of teach that. But that would be a little bit more of kind of a really active, somebody who is observing several mistakes, has the time to prepare this, put this into a little bit of a lesson, and maybe share that as an audio file or as a PDF or something. But that would be really going the extra mile for your language exchange partner. If you had like kind of a teaching background, or you kind of recognize, oh, these are some common mistakes. But I think most native speakers might not necessarily be trained as a teacher. They might just like, oh, that sounds wrong, but I don't know why that sounds wrong. I just recognize that it's wrong and you should say it this way, but maybe not necessarily the teaching part of, okay, this is a book, you should go check that lesson out or something like that. But yeah, this kind of cross reverse and reading and working on pronunciation. I know a couple of people are working on a shadow technique in the speaking challenge, or working on kind of speaking from a script. So I think I was listening to an audio file from Marina, I think, if I'm not mistaken, when we're talking about apps, language apps. And there was an idea of like, maybe continue with these daily topics or improvise, talk about something completely different. The other one was this kind of language shadowing of something there. And I think I was also trying to think of some way to get a dialogue. So maybe there could be some way to interact with part of a dialogue where somebody's their side of the conversation might be muted, and you kind of need to role play or jump into that conversation or speak for yourself. So I could see how if there was a language app for the speaking challenge, maybe here's a random topic for a monologue. Here's just talk whatever's on your mind. Here's maybe try doing some language shadowing, like repeat what you just heard, or maybe try to be part of a conversation and say you have just like 20 seconds to respond to a question, and then there's like the timer part to push you to keep moving forward. And yeah, with my French language partner, we made recordings of an Arsène Lupin story. I wanted to read for me. Yeah, so maybe try to find a story that you would like to practice, just kind of exchange this. I think I didn't get very far with this about a year ago, but last November or so, I was thinking of a kind of a some kind of a similar program here, where it was BYOB, bring your own book, and so or a page or two. So for some students on WhatsApp, I've told them to kind of take a picture of a page, have them read it out loud, and then I can kind of correct their pronunciation, and then also encourage them to describe what they understood and let me know what were some new vocabulary words that they didn't know from that page. So just try to extract as much information from that idea. So yeah, this bring your own book or bring your own article, because whenever there's a kind of a book club, and you say, okay, for this month we're working on this one book, it's a bit of a risk because maybe not everybody likes that book, or maybe not everybody is interested in that. But if you get, okay, this month we're working on books, everybody bring a book that you're working on, then everybody is interested in, like, okay, everybody's reading something. So maybe instead of just one book that everybody's talking about, maybe then everybody discovers 30 books. And then you get kind of a, what did you like about that? Could you describe what you're reading there? So maybe we could include that slightly in the July. See, hey, this month, work on a book for the next few weeks, and describe what it's about, and a little many kind of book reports of what was this chapter about, what was an interesting thing you've learned from that. So yeah, maybe we could include that. I'll kind of throw that out there for an activity we can do for July. But so yeah, try to be creative as much as you can with these language exchange things, and just throw those ideas out there with your partners. Like, hey, I'm interested in this. Yeah, exactly. With Tanya of English Challenges, she does some things with here's the book. But my reaction to that, I mean, the idea is great, and I think exists offline in many places. But I was thinking, like, okay, how could you make this still even more accessible to more people, and say, okay, how about everybody brings their own book, and then it becomes a bit of a book fair instead of just a one book experience there. And I know there are websites out there for like book recommendations and things like that. So, but when you get actual people reading something and then recommending it, then that's even more stimulating, I think, on there. Since you're like, okay, I have to read this book. I mean, in middle school, high school, there was like a list of classics where I had to read it. Maybe I didn't want to read it, but then I enjoyed it because I had to read it and discuss it. But sometimes if you're learning something you enjoy and you feel like talking about it, then it's more interesting, it's more stimulating. And I was having a conversation with my wife yesterday about the like homeschooling, and thinking like, sometimes at school, what are the things you still remember? The skills and the things. Is it the things that you were obligated to learn? Did you immediately forget all that stuff? Or do you still remember the things you enjoyed or that were interesting? So, I mean, there's more of a likelihood that you remember what you enjoyed learning, and that is applicable somehow to your daily life or your hobbies or your work. So, if you're going to be reading something, maybe something short text, maybe nonfiction, fiction, try to find something that would be interesting to you, and then just maybe commit to sticking to it for about a few weeks so you could discuss it or talk about other people, talk about it with other people. Okay, well, we've kind of gone up to the end of this hour. I love these weekly sessions where we get a chance to talk about different ideas here and hear from all of you. And so there were couple of these links for today. I'll try to add these back into the video description, because I think in the chat box that text will delete after this video finishes. But yeah, also feel free to move this conversation over to the Facebook group if you're there, and if you are discovering this video, please feel free to join the 30-day speaking challenge on the website hugginsinternational.com/30-day speaking challenge. So have a great day, all of you, and we'll be in touch in the daily emails and then in the Facebook group, and have a great start of the week. Take care. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sharif. Thank you, Emanuela, Maria, and who else was here? Carol, yes, and Gosia, and yeah, Emanuela, yeah. So yeah, just want to say thank you to all of you for joining, and have a great day, great rest of the week. Take care.